On this channel, I have talked about Britannic more times than I can count at this point, and even more so on my Discord. People have come to me regarding many of the ship's mysteries and what-ifs. I guess people kinda see me as a Britannic guy in the ship community, more so for my Britannic movie videos. I don't really want myself to be known only for this, but either way, one of the most common questions I have seen regarding Britannic is if we can raise the wreck. If so, should we even raise it? Short answer, no. But I think this topic is quite interesting. Interesting enough to warrant making this video. So, short recap. It's a sunny morning on November 21st, 1916. His Majesty's hospital ship Britannic is but a few hours away from reaching her final stop in Mujos, where she would pick up a large complement of wounded soldiers. At 8:12 a.m. though, she would strike a mine off the coast of the island of Kia and sink in less than an hour, taking 30 crew along with her. She ended up resting on her starboard side in 400 feet of water, being discovered in 1975 by the famous explorer Jacques Cousteau. He found that while the bow had been crippled from the ship's ascent, the wreck was in incredible condition compared to most other ships in similar situations. Now we come back to the present. One thing I have learned from my time in the ship community is that people love to speculate. I hear the question brought up even today about if it's possible to raise Titanic's wreck, so obviously when it comes to any famous shipwreck, that question has been given thought to Britannic. Now, while it would be cool to see a fully raised Britannic out of the water after over 100 years, many people asking this question seem to forget that Britannic has been sitting on the bottom of the Aegean Sea for over 100 years. Let me elaborate. Yes, it is true that Britannic's wreck is one of the best preserved in the world, but this is because of the circumstances she is in. The ship is covered in life-breathing coral, protecting the wreck from rusticles that ate the iron out of the steel. This is one of the many reasons why Britannic looks like Britannic and not like her sister Titanic. In Titanic's case, the coral growing on Britannic does not exist that far down, allowing iron-eating rusticles to take over. This has caused the wreck to slowly collapse under its own weight, but Britannic simply doesn't face this threat because of the protective layer of coral reef. The relatively light current and little to no human interference has also kept the ship looking like Britannic. As for ships like Lusitania, for example, yeah. While the Lusitania is in a similar depth as Britannic, and is also resting on her side, the heavy currents off the South Irish coast, along with heavy human interference, has torn up the superstructure and has crushed, then rolled the whole to where it's almost a pancake. Take these circumstances away from Britannic, and what do you have to preserve an 882-foot long ship? It's proven to take decades to preserve small wooden ships and steel submarines. Imagine how long it would take, not to mention the amount of money you would need, to preserve a ship like Britannic. She has been laying on their side for over 100 years, which has most certainly caused massive structural damage. The coral that I mentioned earlier, while it does protect the steel, is eating away almost all of the remaining wooden decks and interiors. The wheelhouse, for example, was built from wood rather than the rest of the superstructure's steel. It is now gone. It would simply not be worth the time and effort to raise and restore her back to her former glory, when you can simply leave the wreck on the bottom of the ocean, where it will be preserved for a very long time. There's also the factor of how. How would you even raise a ship the size of Britannic? Yes, we have risen ships centuries older, but those said ships are usually small wooden ships or steel submarines. Raising a ship as large as Britannic has been done in the past with the Concordia. In fact, that ship was much larger than Britannic and also went down in the Mediterranean Sea. But the Costa Concordia was not only half out of water, but the ship was only a wreck for a short period of time. Raising a ship as large as Britannic at her depth has never been done before because it's basically impossible for her age. The second she would reach the surface, the oxygen in the air would brace the steel once more, and since she has been underwater for so long, Britannic would basically become a giant sponge. Without water, she would dry up and disintegrate. This isn't as much of a problem for smaller ships, as you can relatively easily keep them wet. Britannic's size, though, would make it much more difficult, which is why it has never been done before. The machines required to raise the ship in the first place would be a hassle to create, then build, then ship to the wreck, then get down to the wreck. You get the idea. And also, what about the bow? Okay, so let's just say that in an impossible circumstance we were able to raise the wreck. What do you do with it afterwards? Where do you put it? How do you go about restoring it? And in what context do you display the ship in? First of all, you need to realize just as much time it would take to restore Britannic. Like I mentioned earlier, it would take decades of work to first get the ship in a habitable condition for workers, then just as much work to restore her back to either her hospital ship livery or her proposed ocean liner livery. While it would be nice to see the ship in her intended design, it is far more realistic to assume she would be restored to her hospital ship livery. Restoring her to even this state, though, would take immense work, as you would have to replace all the wood decks that have rotted away, as well as all the wood furnishings of the interior. In some cases, you would have to completely replace certain areas of the ship, which were made purely of wood. But there's also the big elephant of the room, which is the bow. The bow would no doubt have to be cut away from the wreck upon raising, meaning that an entire new bow would have to be built, then added to Britannic Subic style. In the end, there really wouldn't be much of the original Britannic left, which I'll get to later. Once all of this is done, you would need to figure out where to display the ship. Do we display it in Naples, Southampton, maybe New York? I think the best place to display the Britannic in would be Belfast, specifically the Thompson Dry Dock. While this would cause long-term structural problems, it is simply the perfect place to display the ship, where you could walk down and experience what it was like for the many workers that helped build the Olympic class. You could see the propellers, and even more so, create a museum exhibit to showcase the propeller that took the 30 lives lost on Britannic, and put it into proper context. But let's now think about another aspect of raising Britannic. Not about if we can raise her, but if we should raise her in the first place. In my opinion, it is cooler to see the wreck of Britannic still in time, exactly as she has been for over 100 years. Looking at video of the ship's decks now is an almost spooky setting, just knowing that people lived on this ship, people walked on these decks, people once shoveled coal into these boilers. Then remembering that you are 400 feet below the surface on a wreck over 100 years old. I feel that lively feeling is somewhat lost when you remove the ship from this setting. Yes, the knowing is still there when you're walking around these areas, but when you have the ship all prettied up to her former glory and you can see the whole 882-foot length in your sight, you kind of forget everything it's been through up to this point and the history she has built up. The ship would no doubt need to have some areas completely rebuilt to restore her back to her former glory, such as the bow. Just look at ships that have been raised to the surface and restored. You can't really feel the history behind everything they've been through, when in some cases they have been turned into complete reproductions, so many parts replaced and added that they don't even feel original anymore. That is why I believe ships should just be left alone. Yes, for ships like Titanic, which suffer a severe threat, raising little pieces from the wreck somewhat keeps this surreal feeling there. Not to mention that these small artifacts don't require nearly as much restoration and can be kept more or less original. So, what can we take away from this? Well, I think that people should appreciate what shipwrecks have to offer and should stop thinking about how we can preserve them. I personally am tired of seeing the same media published every time a major dive takes place on Titanic about if it's possible to preserve the ship. It doesn't matter if it's possible. Shipwrecks in many cases are graves for hundreds and in some cases thousands of people, and while it is fun to speculate, I think that ships should just be left in their final resting place, away from society and where they can be left alone.